All right, good afternoon and welcome to our Missouri Prairie Foundation webinar, documenting multiple types of pollinators through photography with Angella Moorehouse. My name is Emily Gustafson and I am the operations coordinator for the Missouri Prairie Foundation. I want to thank you all for joining us for this webinar today. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section on your screen. And at the end, I will read those out to Angella. This webinar is being recorded and the link will be shared with all of you tomorrow, along with resources mentioned during the presentation and Q&A session. And now for some background on our presenter. Angella Moorehouse works as a field representative for the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission in West Central Illinois, where she prepares conservation easements to protect high-quality natural areas and assists in the management and monitoring of these sites. She has been conducting photography surveys of flower visiting insects on 30 protected preserves in West Central Illinois since 2018. Angella has published several rapid field guides on wasps, bees, flies, and moths with the Field Museum. Flower Bugs is her first book and is intended as a field guide for the identification of flower visiting Heteroptera or true bugs in the Midwest. We are excited to have Angella here today to share with us. And so go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy to talk to you. I actually was born in Kirksville, Missouri, but basically I grew up just across the river from Alexandria, Missouri, which is the northeast tip of Missouri. So I'm in a little town called Warsaw, Illinois. I do occasionally run across to Missouri because it's closer than going to other parts of the state. So it's kind of home to me. I'm very comfortable going to both Missouri and Iowa because it's, to me, I'm in the tri-state area, and a lot of times it's much better than going to Chicago. So I really do appreciate Missouri. So as you said, I work for the Nature Preserve Commission for about 27 years now. I do a lot of land protection as a primary job, but my love and my passion is doing inventory specifically of insects and pollinators. I started out with a degree in plant ecology, and botany was where it was at. That's how you get the job, is to know your plants. And so I was a plant ecologist for the Department of Natural Resources. As part of my job, you got extra duties. Well, about 10 years or so ago, the pollinators started becoming a big deal, and nobody knew anything about pollinators. And I had a couple interns that had studied bees. And so I had them teach me bees. I'd been doing butterflies for a long time because butterflies land on plants. And I'm out there photographing flowers, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's things on those flowers. They move, and they're far more interesting than the flowers that don't move. So I transitioned. I'm a reformed plant ecologist. I now am solely focused on insects. Occasionally they bring me back and they tell me I have to do plants, but you know, I do still, they're important. The plants are important to the insects, but somebody's got to do the insects. So I don't do all this alone. I actually am about an hour and a half away from my nearest colleague. So I end up doing a lot of my field work by myself. We do try to get together once in a while. But I'm just going to show you, acknowledge a few of my collaborators. Ray Garoff here, we overlap a bunch of counties. He works on the state sites. He works for the Department of Natural Resources as a district heritage biologist. So he's responsible for a lot of the management, and he does a lot of the wildlife surveys. But he is the one that was doing bee research as an intern with me. And so he is one of those that really got me hooked onto bees. Dr. Jason Bride works for the Natural History Survey. Essentially, he's a dragonfly expert who's done a lot of work with quality assessments, so coefficients of conservatism for insects, which is what I'm really interested in. So he saw my data and said, hey, I can help you out with the statistics, which I'm weak at. And so he's looking at all my wonderful data and trying to crunch the numbers and see if we can't assign values to the different pollinators to determine how likely they are to be found in remnants and how conservative they are on the landscape. And then Laura Richa Anchor, if you're familiar with the Flora of the Chicago region that just came out a couple of years ago, it's a huge encyclopedic volume with Jerry Wilhelm. Well, Laura did all the insect work in there. It is billed as a plant book, but if anybody opens that book and takes a look at that, Laura has tremendous amount of flower associated insects in the back of that book. And it's absolutely phenomenal. And it is worth $100+ and hefting that thing around. But Laura and I have had some wonderful times together. I've been sending her bees because she does the lab identification. She's got this amazing memory. She's self-taught. We have a lot in common. All three of us are very high and very intense people. So when we get together, we have way too much fun. So my project goals, like I said, my project that I started in 2018 is about using photography to document the pollinators and the flower visiting insects. I am not happy with just doing bumblebees or just doing butterflies. I've done butterflies for almost 25 years, but with the need to know more about pollinators, I'm like, while I'm out in the field, why don't I just document everything? Which is hugely ambitious, and my data set is getting just absolutely unruly. But while I'm out there, I figure I'm spending the time out there. I might as well try to document as best I can with the limited time I have, because I still have to protect land. So my goals are first to develop baseline species list for all my sites. And so I did that within the first 5 years. And then I wanted to know what different flower types that each pollinator was visiting. I wanted to know which ones were specialists on, especially the conservatives and the rare plants. And I wanted to know the influence of some of our management and how that impacts our insects. So for a summary, generally I try to do a 60-minute survey 4 times a year. Once in a while, the path is really long. I'd use the path of least resistance. So if there's an established trail, I will take that rather than bushwhacking, because it's really hard when I was doing everything by recording on a tablet and then holding my camera to bushwhack through a bunch of blackberries. Much easier to walk the trail. I now use a voice recorder on my phone, so I have a lanyard around my neck, and I just basically talk to myself for about an hour and then go back and listen to that or read the dictation and then record my data in a spreadsheet. I do that 4 times a year to basically document the different seasons, the different floral responses. I visit 6 protected sites in the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission system. So these are permanently protected easements that I have worked on, or that most of these are sites within my area. I do 6 new sites a year for 5 years, so that's 30 sites total, and then I repeat. So I'm now in my 2nd year of repeating. So last year I went back and visited the first 6 sites that I had done back in 2018, and now I'm doing the sites that I visited in 2019. And so on and so forth. I'm just trying to figure out if there's any differences between 5 years ago and today with changes in management and changes in the landscape around us. I record all flower associations, all the different flowers that each insect visited, insects that are potentially contributing to pollen. So even if they have pollen on them and they're right next to a flower, I record that one. I record all bees, all butterflies and skippers, regardless of whether or not they're on a flower, because I really want to know about those. I photograph as many species as possible, not every individual. And the butterflies, because I've been doing it for 25 years, I'm really good on the butterfly identification. So I'm not going to chase a tiger swallowtail for a long time. I'm just going to record eastern tiger swallowtail. I got it. I'm going to move on. I'm going to focus on the ones that are harder to identify. I upload everything to iNaturalist for identification assistance. It's nice to have confirmation, and it's nice to share my data for my different sites. I love that iNaturalist maps everything, so I can go back to iNaturalist and I can zoom in on the map and I can see, I haven't developed any projects or anything, but I can see what's found on my different preserves. I've collected a small number of bees, especially those that we can't identify in the field, so mostly the sweat bees, the halictids, and send those to Laura for identification in the lab. So the types of data I collected, of course, in addition to recording those flower visiting insects and which flowers they visit, obviously I'm recording the date, the time, and how long I spend, temperature, cloud cover, wind speed. Obviously, I try to pick sunny days above 60 degrees. The pollinators will still visit if it's windy, but obviously for photography reasons, it's far better to have very little or no wind. It's really hard when it gets 15, 20 miles an hour. The plants are falling over and I'm having to grab the plants by my hand and try to get a photograph. That doesn't work out too well. So I try to avoid those days whenever possible. I have information on the vegetative community types and the grades. So hill prairies or whatever type of community is, a mesic forest, and we grade them A, B, C, D. So an A would be the highest quality, and so forth. And then the management history, we try to report how often we do prescribed fires, how often we clear, do forestry clearing with forestry mowers, herbicide applications for invasive control, things like that. The frequency in which we do that and whether it's been intense or not. And these are my 30 sites. So obviously that's just a big box over that area of West Central Illinois. But I actually live, like I said, right across the river from northeastern Missouri. So that MRSHCG, that's basically right next to my house. That's my backyard. Because those two sites are real near my yard, I'll talk about that later, but I have a lot of really good things in my yard because I'm right next to some really amazing sites. So just some photographs to kind of show you some examples of some of the sites that I'm visiting and how they're being managed. So this is Grub Hollow Hill Prairie down in Pike County. It's a managed Lusk Hill Prairie. So this is about an hour north of St. Louis. Samuel Barnum Mead Savanna, which is named after Mead's milkweed, Mead's sedge. So he's the guy that basically identified those back in the early 1800s. So this is just a savanna about 30 miles from my house. That one is managed. They call it a savanna, but it's really more of a prairie. Hawk Creek Sedge Meadow is another privately owned wetland that's received minimal management initially. It is now in the process of receiving more management. So we're doing a lot of clearing of those trees in the background around the edges of the wetland. So the count that I'm doing this year is going to be much different than it was 5 years ago. Harry Patterson Savanna is named after another famous botanist. This is up in Henderson County, kind of close to Burlington, Iowa. This is another one that we've been burning intensely and doing a lot of clearing. So that's an intensely managed area. Harper's Woods is another private forest that is unmanaged. The landowner does not want us to do any prescribed fire, does not want us to do any invasive control other than they let us hand pull garlic mustard, which is very time consuming. So that's all we've done out at this site. So it really is pretty much an unmanaged forest. Forever Fields is a former strip mine. So Pheasants Forever owns it, and they have planted it to some native prairie. I love the fact that they've done a strip of golden Alexanders because that's really important for pollinators. So I've got some interesting results there. I think Forever Fields has one of the highest number of individual pollinators of any of one of my sites, but the quality of those pollinators and the species is lower, of course, than a remnant site. So my results, after 6+ years, I visited the 30 sites, 173 hours out in the field. I'm getting close to about 900 taxa. So this is species as close as possible. So if sometimes I can only identify it to genus or subgenus, rarely to tribe and family on a few levels, I put them on iNaturalist. So hopefully someday either the IA will get better or an expert will find it and help me with identifications. So that's 26,460 individuals so far. I get about 6 new species per hour. I was getting about 153 individuals per hour when I was handwriting everything out. Now that I've switched to voice recording, that number is going up significantly because obviously when I don't have to stop and write down and I can pay attention and just talk as I take a picture, I'm getting a lot more. I'm able to observe a lot more. My previous max was about 55 species per hour, so 1 a minute. For 400 individuals an hour. So a baseline, I was really surprised to find that all of the sites, even little tiny cemetery prairies that are only about an acre in size, I only survey those for 30 minutes because they're so small, but they all have a lot of diversity. I'm amazed at how many different species and the number of species per hour. The abundance of insects is fairly good. The dense woods, originally I planned on doing a whole bunch of surveys in dense woodlands, and then practicality sets in and you get in the middle of a woods in June and July. And number one, some of them are covered with nettle. They're not fun to go in June and July if they don't have a trail. But there's no flowers. So there's not very, very few flowers blooming in the center of the woods. So what I ended up doing in some cases is either omitting the site completely or just sampling along the outer edge. I still want to know the insects that are actually utilizing and breeding within those woods, but the pollinators are coming out of the woods to the flowers. And so I want to know what's in the nature preserve, but I'm having to sample the outside of the nature preserves to actually see the ones on the flowers. I spent a lot more time in patches of highly attractive flowers. So I'll basically walking my route and I will deviate when I want to go towards a patch of flowers. I'm not going to go in the woods, like I said, in the middle of June. If I went in the middle of the woods to get the spring beauties in April, I may take a different route in June because I want to get those flowers. So there's a little bit of bias. I'm trying to find as much diversity on these nature preserves as I possibly can, and that means changing my routes a little bit. I got way more non-bees than I expected, and I'll show you that a little bit later. I've been able to photograph over 90% of all the different taxa and species. Not every individual, but every species. I try to get a photograph when I can. So I just did some interesting little bar graphs. And so this is all 30 species here, just looking at the abundance, so number of individuals versus these species or taxa richness. So, I mean, it was pretty good for the taxa richness. Like I said, most of them are all 100 species. Some of them approaching 200. The abundance is kind of up and down. Like I said, this Forever Fields, which was the strip mine lake, is fairly high. And that's a complete, reconstruction in land that was really abused. And so they're trying to restore that. And they're planting lots of flowers, which attracts the pollinators, but they may not be conservative pollinators. So there's a lot of things like corn earworms and cabbage white butterflies and stuff like that is attracted to that type of habitat. So these pie charts, this was one of the things I was really interested to see the different taxonomic groups and to see what I'm sampling. So I expected to find a lot of bees, but when it came to actually tax their species, bees only represented 21% for the first 5 years. And that really surprised me. So essentially bees, beetles, and flies all made up about the same proportion when you look at species. Beetles, I was really shocked about. There was a lot of little teeny beetles, the tumbling flower beetles, some of the skin beetles. I mean, there's all sorts of wedge-shaped beetles, weevils. There's a bunch of weevils that actually live on and feed on pollen, and you'll find them on the flowers. There's a lot more flies than just the syrphid or flower flies. There's tachynids, there's thick-headed flies, there's soldier flies, even crane flies will actually feed on nectar. And that is something that's really amazed me, is the diversity that's found. And of course, the reason for my book is the true bugs actually represent 8%. I never would have thought that. And still to this day, whenever I see anybody talk about the different guilds of pollinators, I never see anybody mention bugs ever. Rarely, sometimes they'll mention ants because ants have obviously an important role. They distribute certainly the seeds of a lot of the woodland wildflowers, but they will actually sometimes rob the nectar and actually can be antagonistic. But ants do feed on pollen. So that was just really interesting to see the number of, and the more I learn to look for Heteroptera true bugs, the more I find. So I just went out yesterday out into one of my preserves, and I just can't believe how many. I found more bugs than I found bees, because I think I've trained myself to be looking for them. And perhaps the bees weren't out because it was a little windy yesterday. But so the number of individuals, when you look at that, obviously bees are representing the vast majority, but that's only a third. So there's 2/3 of non-bees out there by individuals. It's kind of amazing. Wasps were represented by 15% of species. There's a lot of different types of wasps, being closely related to bees, that visit flowers, but wasps also feed on other things. So many of the wasps are predatory, so they're not just relying on pollen and nectar. And most wasps are solitary, so you're not seeing large numbers of the same species of wasp. You're seeing a lot of different types of wasp, which is why it's so different from 15 to 6%. Same thing with true bugs, went down from 8 to 5% when you look at the difference between richness versus the number of individuals. Butterflies are only 12%. I think butterflies are kind of in trouble. Certainly skippers are in trouble. I try to photograph every skipper possible because I want to know the rare ones and what's happening with skippers, but we are losing skippers, seems like every year. I've been doing it for about 25 years now, and the diversity of especially grass skippers continues to decline. So the Pollinator Plant Associations, most of the time I've been giving these talks, and I do it based on the plants. So I give a lot of talks to people that basically plant prairies. And so I come at it from more of a plant aspect. So I show people the different plants. We talk about golden Alexanders and mountain mints and some of the most important plants for attracting especially true bugs, but some of the other pollinators as well. So I do it kind of plant-based. So certain plants are definitely more attractive to insect visitors. I call those candy plants. So a lot of times I go into a site, and if I see a candy plant blooming, I'm going to go over there. I'm going to check it out because I know I'm going to find something, depending on the different times of the year. I've documented 294 flowers that had insect visitors. 20% of those are non-native. So a lot of times the number of visitations is dependent on what's abundant in the environment. Not always. So there's things like lead plant, prairie clovers, bee balms, and thistles. It doesn't matter how many of them on the site, they are going to attract pollinators. There can be a little tiny patch of 4 thistles, and it'll have, 50 wriggle or 50 great spangled fritillaries on it. Sometimes wriggle fritillaries. But they will be attracted to those because it has tremendous pollen. So there's the top 5. These are from my sites. That's not going to be for everything. If I went to a different part of Illinois, or I went over to Missouri, these would not necessarily be the top 5. But for my sites, these were the top 5 plants. They are not very exciting. I would not recommend planting any of those, certainly not wild parsnip, but mountain mint. Always plant mountain mint. There's several species of mountain mint. But obviously, Canada tall goldenrod is very abundant out there. That's why everything is visiting that. Wild parsnip is a promiscuous flower. So that's a scorpion fly on there, which is not your typical pollinator. Essentially, the wild parsnip has these open flowers, so you don't need specialized mouth parts to get to the pollen and the nectar. Everything's right there at the surface. So everything, no matter what your mouth part is, you can feed on it. You don't need to be a long-tongued bee to be able to get to that resource. Daisy fleabane, little teeny tiny flowers. I never would have guessed that daisy fleabane, once you start paying attention, the diversity of insects that visit daisy fleabane is phenomenal. White snakeroot is basically a weed in a lot of our woodlands, so it's kind of a disturbance species. My colleagues will ask me, we'll have tree falls that come down because of storms, and then they'll just have an explosion of white snakeroot. And they ask me, what are you going to do about it? Which is kind of funny. You're asking me what I'm going to do about it. It's number 5. I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to count the insects. It is a part of the natural succession. It's going to disappear eventually as the forest matures and the trees grow back over. But I have no problem with white snakeroot. I have a problem with wild parsnip. I would prefer that they're not visiting that. I have a problem with autumn olive, garlic, mustard, all those. I would prefer the pollinators not visit them. But when I'm now doing my surveys, I can't think about pulling, non-native invasive plants. I have to focus with my camera and go out there and get them. Mountain mint has attracted some wonderful, wonderful things. These red-banded hair streaks are fairly common in Missouri, especially central and southern Missouri. They have been one of the beneficiaries of global warming. So they're starting to move north. We found them over the last 10 years. We found them in Pike County, and then they've come up to my place in Hancock, and now they're up in Henderson. So they keep moving north. They're breeding. I had 3 or 4 in my yard last year. So they're now breeding in my yard, and they were never here 10, 20 years ago. Impacts of management. So I've already mentioned we do a lot of prescribed fire. Excuse me. We do some brush clearing. We use, the forestry mowers with a pecan head, whatever, to clear a lot of the trees and the woodies out of some of our preserves. For invasive control, we'll use, herbicides. We'll do mowing. We'll do hand pulling in some cases, just trying to get these sites back to what they should look like, back to their, original remnant conditions. So basically, I divide up all my sites into 3 different types of management. So we have the high intensive management. So these are our high priority sites. These are our top sites that we're going out to, and sometimes, bi-weekly, monthly basis, doing some type of work. So we're burning these every year, every 2 years. We're out there clearing trees. We're out there treating the invasives. These are our top sites. The moderate to low intensive management are sites that we still think are important, and we get out there when we can. But we often, can only burn, maybe once or twice every 10 years. We can only do clearing invasive works as time permits. So we don't have enough staff. We don't have enough money. So we do what we can on those sites. And then there's the sites, most of these are often private, or they're isolated sites that may be small, or they're so far away from the person's office that we don't get there, and they simply have fallen away and we just can't get to them. So they have no management. And so just looking at index abundance, so the insect abundance, so the number of individuals grouped by management. So this is interesting. I wish it would just lined up perfectly. But statistically speaking, and the Natural History Survey has done some similar work with a totally different data set, and it was getting similar results. The moderate to low intensity management versus the no management is very similar, because simply once we don't keep up with the management, if we lapse for 5 years, we don't get back to a site for 7 years, we have to essentially start all over again, because the invasive species have gotten angry and they've grown more aggressive, and we have to start over from square one, or even worse. Sometimes the invasives just, the response of those invasive, if you don't keep on top of them, can get really bad. And so it's usually sometimes better to do nothing than it is to do low management. The ones that have high intensity, although this isn't really statistically significant yet, we're trying to figure out with all the biases of what's going on there. But there is a slight there's a slight statistical advantage to the high intensity management. But we feel that out in the field when we see more insects. We just see a better response, certainly to the plants. Obviously, pale purple coneflower blooms much better on a site that's just been burned. If you haven't burned a site for a while, your pale purple coneflowers just kind of peter out. If they're not there, they're not providing for pollinators. So taxa richness, so the number of species or taxa, based on the management intensity. Again, kind of similar thing. But we're just not seeing a big difference between no management and the low intensity management. So we don't know long-term what this means, but I do feel like when I look at the sites where we're doing high intensity management, a lot of these insects are ground nesters, or there's refugia elsewhere. We try never to burn a site completely. We want to make sure that there's refugia somewhere, so that if we're burning these up, they have a source by which they come back to. So native plant diversity and quality indices. So I've always heard everything in Illinois, the natural area inventory site, is all based on floristics. So it's all based on plants, and the FQI, the floristic quality index, we use a lot. So which plants are most likely found in conservative remnant sites? We don't have that for insects yet. And I'm really, like I said, I'm looking at diversity that's very similar between the strip mine lake, the little tiny 1-acre cemetery, and then a high quality savanna over here. Now, there's got to be a difference there. And so I think that that difference is likely due to the conservatism of the insects. I think you're going to find the more rare specialists at the high quality remnant versus some of those other more degraded. But we can't really show that yet. So we're trying to come up with an indices for the insects. But I've looked at the ones for the floristic quality index, and I've tried to compare sites that have a high floristic quality index versus a low floristic quality index. Insects don't follow patterns. So none of this stuff, native plant diversity, the number of native plants, high versus low, remnant versus non-remnant, none of that has been statistically significant, which is kind of frustrating because you expect it to be and it's not. So looking at that coefficients of conservatism, just kind of a little bit of history there. Within Illinois, the original floristic quality assessments, the FQI, was developed by Swink and Wilhelm back in 1979, and John Taft basically developed it for the rest of Illinois in 1997. And we use that a little bit. A lot of times we still do a lot of subjective ranking. We have a list of 20 different criteria, which we say A, B, C, and we've got all these different rankings that we do to determine whether a site is a high quality remnant or not. But within those CC values, basically for plants, you basically rank the plant 1 to 10, 0 if it's non-native, on the likelihood of finding it in a high quality remnant. So some people have tried to kind of replicate that for insects. And so they looked at the cicadas, leafhoppers, plant hoppers, tree hoppers. I can't pronounce that. So Adam Wallner and Chris Dietrich did that, and they used 6 different traits. So the number of broods per year, the geographic origin, whether or not they're migratory, or they overwintering in the ground versus in the, obviously anything that overwinters in the vegetation, if you burn during the winter, you're going to consume the overwintering insects. Wing length, which I thought was kind of unusual. I suppose wing length would be related to how far they can travel. Habitat fidelity, are they closely associated with one type of habitat? host plant specificity. So whether or not it needs a particular species or genus of plant. And so they rank those traits 1 through 3, and they sum that value for the C value. So I've done butterfly quality indices kind of the same way, but only did 4 traits for that one. So again, the number of broods per year, overwintering, whether or not it's in the ground, in the stems, or migratory, whether the larvae require a specific type of plant, and whether they require the specific types of habitat. And all those are easy to do. The great thing about those is it's less subjective. You know, a butterfly either has, 1 brood, 3 broods. That's just something that happens. You don't have to kind of feel, well, that one feels, more rare to me. So there's a lot of subjectivity in some of the others, but that one's not. And so I kind of like that one. I don't always agree with the end results, but it's there and it's standardized. So there's additional assessments, which are essentially just lists that have been compiled by some of the insect people to just kind of identify remnant dependent or specialists of prairies. And so Ron Panzer did a lot of work with that. And he's published some of that in the 1990s. Reed, 1996 in Minnesota, identified prairie specialist. And Rich Henderson is basically even trying to update his prairie restricted insects for Wisconsin. So that is just insects that are found in prairies. So not necessarily whether the insect is rare, but whether it would be found within the prairie. And so one of the big things that I've certainly found is, we always know that remnants are important. But of course, remnants support, and you all know this, remnants support rare plants that are just not found elsewhere. So you can't find, there's certain things like prairie dropseed, lead plant, goat's rue, some of the things like that I just don't see everywhere. You just don't find them. You can plant them, but you just don't necessarily find them. I don't find them on the roadsides anymore. The farmers mow all the ditches. We just don't see them anymore. But the real value in these remnants I'm finding is when you're trying to reconstruct a community, if you're close to a remnant. This is the case of my yard. I am close to 2 nature preserves. I have a 3,000 acre natural area right outside my door here. And the insects are able to find my little oasis. So I planted a ton of native plants. And because I had rare insects nearby, they found my little oasis and they came here. If I was in the middle of, thousands of acres of corn and soybeans, I would not have had the same results. I'm up to almost 1,900 invertebrates identified, terrestrial invertebrates identified and photographed in my yard over the last 15 years. And I keep finding more. It seems like lately I've nightlight, I'm finding a few more every week. So it's just amazing if you have that source, that remnant source of insects. So managing expectations versus what I actually got. So I found higher diversity and abundance per site than I additionally expected. Remnants didn't have higher diversity or abundance compared to non-remnants. That shocked me. I really thought there would be a difference between a high quality site and a low quality site, and there simply wasn't, at least not with the data I have yet. Sites with a higher FQI weren't better than the ones with a lower floristic quality index. Specialist insects were found at all sites. So essentially, if you have the plant, the insect, if it's there in the area, will find it. It really didn't matter whether it's a prairie or the edge of the woods or high quality, low quality. If it's there and the insect's in the area, it finds it. Well-managed sites seem to have a higher diversity and abundance, but it's not statistically significant. So the question is, can we assess insect community quality based on this data? So working with Dr. Jason Bride, we have initially separated the sites. So we did remnant and non-remnant. Sites that were seriously degraded, we basically threw those out. Some of the sites are undergoing extensive management to the point that it kind of sets things back for a little while until the site heals. So we separated the sites into 3 groups: managed high quality remnants, unmanaged remnants, and degraded non-remnants. So significantly altered systems. And so this is 23 out of the 30 sites that we just kind of lined up. And so this is kind of how we look at the different sites. So we grouped them like that. And so I did that butterfly quality index. So I ran that, and this is just butterflies. So it doesn't include skippers. It just does the butterflies. And so again, I have a huge outlier. And that sand prairie scrub oak on the far left, that is where the regal fritillaries are. There's a few regal fritillaries at another site, but by and large, that's our big regal fritillary site. And that's why it's so high, because the regal fritillary has a C value of 10. It's the highest there can be. I have a cat coming in. Um, and the unmanaged remnants and degraded remnants, there's not a whole lot of difference, which is kind of disappointing. So we looked at, excuse me. So we started looking at, can we come up with our own values? And so this is some of the things that Jason Bride basically crunched the numbers. And then he asked me my opinion, my professional opinion based on my time spent out in the field, excuse me, as to what I thought. And I don't necessarily agree with all these. Oh. But this is something we're working with. So this is kind of the numbers on how it teased out. In the case of butterflies, although I don't agree with every single C value, it overall, when you look at the whole community, it comes out about right. I don't think this is quite there yet, but we're working on it. So for example, small milkweed bug is probably more like a 5. So it would be a very common species. So it would be in the middle. It wouldn't be a high up there. The Miracorus leaf-footed bug probably would be. That is really only found on remnants. It's pretty, maybe not a 10, but maybe an 8. So we're still trying to tease that out. We did the same thing for wasp, and I think wasp turned out a little bit better. Although there's a few, excuse me, species of wasp that are definitely, I would say, are definitely remnant dependent. This Sam Burns bee wolf wasp, Philanthus sambornii, I only find on high quality hill prairies. I've only seen it on a couple of them. So that to me would be one of the highest ones, but it's given an 8, which is still pretty high. So again, we're just kind of looking to see what we can do about this. We're not there yet, but I've got this huge data set, and hopefully the more data that I collect, the better this will get. So how will this data be used? So she already mentioned I've done field guides with the Field Museum. So I essentially took my pictures, I plugged them into their, they have this little field guide. So you have these little places where you insert the photos. So you have side-by-side photos. I did it to help myself identify wasps. I did bees, just the common bee genera, because you can't identify a lot of bees down to species. And I've also been working on improvement of the flies for the Midwest. But I kind of got sidetracked with the field stuff. So I've been working on flies, again, to have a guide for myself. I did a moth one, which is in 5 different guides, so the different types of moths, so geometras, alids, things like that, macro, micro. So I can take those out in the field when I night light. And if I can't, even if I don't have access to the internet, I have side-by-side comparisons as to what species it is. So I teach myself through the process of making the guides, and then I have something to laminate and color copies of and take out with me. So the baseline data has been providing a reference as I go back and repeat the sites, but it also gives me a record of what species are there on my nature preserves. Obviously, a lot of this data, a lot of my experience went into the flower bug book that I wrote. So all those photographs and all the associations, assassin bugs are sipping on nectar. Nobody talks about that. They're not supposed to be doing that. Heteroptera true bugs do not follow the rules. Basically, I'm seeing more and more of this. They will eat everything. They will sip on plants. They will eat plant bugs, will eat other bugs. They will eat nectar. They will sip on plants. They will eat dead things. They just have a huge, huge, wide variety of diet. I continue to refine the assessment of the different insect communities. So we're going to keep working on the coefficients of conservatism. And my new one is, I'm working with Casey Carter. She's a pollinator ecologist out of the Natural History Survey. And so she's been doing work with mostly bumblebees for creating these pollinator networks. So you have the list of plants and you have the list of bees, and then there's all those cross lines that show the different associations. So it's a crazy mess. The chart's insane, but it'll show you the strongest association. So which plant has the most strongest association to which species of insect in some cases. So you can see the generalist versus the specialist. The generalist go to every plant, and the specialist only goes to one many, many times. So that type of thing is really interesting. I'm hoping to do more with that. So just a little bit to talk about my book, since I talked about all this other stuff, just to tell you a little bit about why I did this. Nobody had done Heteroptera, nobody had done true bugs, and certainly nobody has been talking about them in terms of their importance to flowering plants. Not every photograph in this book is a pollinator. Some of them are associated with flowers and some of them are not. I just simply put all the different pictures in there and everything I knew about their associations with flowering plants. Some of the photographs are in there from night lighting, just used to basically have a representative photo in there so you can compare it to other species that might be flower visitors or not. So you have it out there. Whenever I ask people, I said, do you want these other photographs? Everybody's like, yes, give us everything. That's what I would say too. I want to know everything. So I put it on the book and I actually have it right next to me. I've been using it as my own reference. When I forget a name or association, I look that up. So I wanted to bring awareness, of course, that these are visiting flowers, that they are basically feeding on pollen and nectar. I want to encourage people to plant native. You want native insects, you plant native flowers. Take photographs so we know what's out there. I mean, it's really hard to know. I work on the Endangered Species Protection Board as a technical advisor for terrestrial invertebrates. And we've nominated, I think, somewhere close to 25 or 30 new insects we have nominated to the next round. So 2025, we will be basically tripling, if not quadrupling, the size of the number of insects that are listed in the state of Illinois. And that's pretty exciting. So that data, anything that we can get from photographers, put on iNaturalist or Bug Guide or whatever, that helps us know, where these are. Photography is the answer. There's not enough professional entomologists out there. I've never taken an entomology class. I have taught myself. I am not a lab expert. I do not dissect genitalia, but I go out there and take pictures and I try to take high quality images and I meet people on iNaturalist that can help me help me take better pictures so that we can get these identified. And obviously protect and preserve native biodiversity. We need those remnants protected. So just a little bit of the true bugs, just to go over some of my pictures. True bugs visit open cup-like flowers, easy access to pollen, just like the wild parsnip. Bugs will visit that one. The proboscis is rigid, so they can't roll it up like butterflies do. It's not curled, so it's a spiky little thread the needle type thing. Accidental pollinator. Some of them are feeding on nectar, but they're not like bees. They're not taking it back to the nest to feed their babies. The babies of true bugs are just kind of laid on the plant, and mom and dad, in most cases, very few exceptions, mom and dad walks away. There's like two exceptions. There's a shield bug and there's a white margin burrowing bug that actually provide maternal care for a couple days. For the most part, true bugs are done. They lay their eggs and they're gone. So true bugs represent about 5% of the insects that were observed, so the different species. And so just here's some of the plant bugs. And again, I've gotten recent pictures of plant bugs feeding on midges, all sorts of other things. They'll feed on dead stuff, but they will feed on pollen. This one on the bottom right there, that's an alfalfa plant bug, which is non-native. I've seen many of them with just pollen all over them. So they are feeding on pollen and nectar. So the assassin ambush damsel bug, these are all predatory bugs. Every one of them in this photograph, on these photographs, are feeding on pollen and nectar. That's not supposed to be the case. So I really wanted to showcase that. You can actually see the pollen. You can see their little mouth parts going in there to feed. So I just find this fascinating. And the more observations I make, the more I see of this kind of instances. So broad-headed leaf-footed bugs, especially as nymphs. Sometimes the nymphs are more likely to feed on flowers than the adults. But sure enough, the adults do visit the flowers. They will feed on them in a lot of cases. And the more you look, the more you see these bugs out there. Stink bugs, especially the one on the bottom center there, that's the common brown stink bug, Eustachius. It is not the brown marmorated stink bug. That one has light colored bands on the antennae. So if you see light colored antennal bands, that's your non-native. These are all native. You identify the brown stink bugs by the spots on their belly. So you need a belly shot. So you can just pick them up and turn them over and take a picture. The one on the top left there, that is a predatory stink bug. Again, not supposed to be feeding on nectar. It's clearly sipping on nectar. So stink bugs visit a lot of different types of flowers, and they're really amazing. Then some of the others, the seed bugs, stilt bugs, all sorts of different bugs. Um, it's just stilt bugs. If everybody's seen biennial gara, common evening primrose, stilt bugs can be all over those glandular plants. They seem to love those. You see the babies on them. Basically, once biennial gara starts blooming, you cannot hardly find a biennial gara that doesn't have stilt bugs on it. So your milkweed bugs, very, very common. That's the large milkweed bug. Large milkweed bug has a straight stripe down the center. The small milkweed bug has one heart over its back. The false milkweed bug has two hearts stacked over its back. So they're all easy to identify. They're not always just associated with milkweeds. The false milkweed bug is associated with Heliopsis, which is a false sunflower. If you have to have that plant for them to produce babies. So this is one of my favorite, just to kind of close out. This is called a tangle vein fly. And this one's on germander. I don't know if any of you know Betsy Beetles. She's out of the Kansas City area, but she wrote a really nice book on the butterflies of the Kansas City area. And she posted on Facebook that she heard this really, really loud fly. And really, really super loud, little tiny, looks like a bee fly. It's not, it's its own weird little family. I went out a week after her into a nice high quality sand prairie, and I heard that sound, and I said, that is Betsy's fly. And sure enough, that was Betsy's fly. So I've only seen it one place, and one other person has seen it at that place too. It's the only place in the whole state of Illinois that's been found. But I love those little tangle vein flies. So with that, I am done, and I'm happy to address any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Angela. I'm just going to go through and ask the questions that have been put into the Q&A. And I think we had one dropped into the chat as well. Of course, if folks have additional questions, please submit those in the Q&A. So first question is, what kind of fire management techniques are used to protect the insect populations at some of the sites that you were discussing stewarding with fire?
Well, mostly we don't have any. There's certain times when I basically say, I don't want this burned. Because I know that there's an insect that's there, and we have to actually put our brake around that little area, or we wet line it or something like that. For the most part, we just don't force fire. Because the weather keeps changing, our fire intensity is going up. So some of our fire gets really, really hot. We change the way we put fire on the landscape so we don't head fire anything. We backfire, which can be even hotter. But like I said, sometimes we just have to simply leave areas unburned. We have to change our fire breaks. A lot of the sites, we have areas that we just don't burn or don't burn as frequently. And so that's our refuge area. I've got some sites that I don't burn. I just leave an area alone. And there's like no management on that site. That's the refugia site. Sometimes there's areas where you're managing one site and the neighbor's not managing at all. And so that's a source of refugia. So just kind of being aware of the landscape around you to make sure you don't burn everything. That's kind of how we do it. And the other reason why I'm doing this is to basically monitor. If our fire intensity is too much, I want to know, are the numbers going down? I don't know if I'll know that in 5, 10, however long I do this, but we have data there. So hopefully long-term we could know.
Great, thank you. You also early on in the presentation mentioned a plant resource that cost over $100 to get. Can you repeat the name of that? And if not, we can go back and look at your presentation and make sure that's included in the email that goes out.
I can't remember what that was. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Somebody can clarify that maybe.
We'll make sure to we'll watch back. We'll make sure to get that in the email. Okay. We had a couple of questions about your photography. So one question was just, you have general suggestions about what is needed to take good close-up photos. And then also questions about what macro lens you use. And do you have any camera recommendations, or what camera do you use? We had one person who asked the only camera that they have is their phone. They're looking to, kind of upgrade to do more insect macro photography. What might that look like?
All right, we've all been there. There's times when I'm out in the field. I usually bring my heavy camera with me, but there's times when I'm not. And Yeah, use a phone. Just do anything you can. A lot of times you can't post on Bug Guide because they'll kick out your image if it's not good enough. But iNaturalist will take anything. And what's amazing, I do these fly workshops, and the fly guys will go through some of the blurriest pictures. And if there's something there that they can identify down to genus or species, they find it. It's absolutely amazing, especially for flies. They're doing phenomenal jobs. So anything, use any camera you have. Personally, I've been using Nikon. I have not gone mirrorless yet because that's going to cost several thousands of dollars. I have some friends that have gone mirrorless. I'm still a little worried about it because the focusing is a little bit, the automatic focusing isn't as quick as it is with the old cameras. But there's the ability to stack. So the ability to take 100 pictures and stack them all together. The camera can do that. My camera cannot do that yet. Like I said, I shoot Nikon. So I have a bunch of Tamron Nikon macro lenses. I like 90 millimeters. That's my favorite. I don't like the long ones. I like to get close to my subject, but everybody has different preferences. But getting a specific macro lens to fit your camera. I use a flash a lot of times, especially when I'm not in full sun. I was using the R1N1 speed light from Nikon. I love that. I've went through two commanders, which is basically the thing on top that basically tells the two flashes on the side what to do. My commander's broken twice, so it's going to cost another $350 if I want to get that one replaced. So I'm using a cheaper flash system right now, which just has a ring around the lens. And I'm happy with that right now because it's less clunky, but the images aren't as good. So there's trade-offs. I mean, there's the more things you attach to your camera, the heavier it gets, the less mobile you are, and the scarier you are to those insects because you find they are so perceptive. You know, they're watching you with all their many eyes went up. And they see every little movement that you do. You have to kind of be really sneaky. One of the good things for the flash a lot of times is the insects that are down there in the plants, they feel like they're hidden. And so, yeah, you're not going to get the cover of National Geographic down there, but you can get a species ID by photographing something that's down in the vegetation. As long as you have a clear view of that whole insect, you just use the flash, you snap a photograph of it, and you can still see it. Obviously, I prefer them on the flowers where I can photograph, what they're on. But there's a lot of equipment out there. I talk about that a little bit in the book on what to use, but it's really personal preference. So what you're comfortable in, but don't get your lack of equipment. Don't let that prevent you from taking pictures. If all you have is a phone, I've got a little bit better phone. You can select phones based on the ones that have better cameras. I think I'm using the Google Pixel 7a right now. I've got an iPhone for work. Both of them are fairly good for taking phone pictures. They're not as good, nor should they be as good as my multi-$1,000 cameras. But they will work. They will get you something, and they will get you something that you can document. The one thing I get, another question, if I may, I forgot to answer is people ask me about, I use photography. What's wrong with me collecting? And I come from the Nature Preserve Commission, so our job is to try to protect diversity. I have no problem with collecting. I am collecting some things. I tell people I don't like to collect unless I know somebody that's going to take my specimen because I don't really have the ability to pin, or I have a little bit of a collection with Ray Garoff. But for the most part, I don't do a lot of collecting. Certainly, I don't have the time to work everything up. So I like photography because it's quick and simple for me. I am so happy that there are people out there like Laura Richard Anchor who can actually go out there and collect voucher specimens of everything. That's great. We need that. But everybody doesn't need to have a voucher specimen collection because they won't take care of it. The domestic beetles will destroy it, and then you're just kind of wasting it. So that's why I do photography, because it's easier to deal with. Sorry.
No, thank you for that answer. I think, lots of folks want to get better at taking photographs of insects, and you have some really inspirational images. I will also mention that I believe that there are macro lens attachments that you can purchase for phones that attach or clip onto phone cameras. So if you're not quite at the stage of investing in a whole like gear kit and you want to try some macro photography with your phone, there are I think a variety of different lenses that you can get for that purpose. So to go to some of your findings with the studies that you've been doing, we had a question that asks, some of your findings seem to be at odds with those of Doug Tallamy, who maintains that there is significantly increased value of native plants in attracting pollinators. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, there are. I'm sampling my sites as they are. So a lot of times the stuff that I plant in my backyard, when I have the ability to control what I put in there, and so I can put the top pollinator plants in there and I can control that. So I've over 100 species of bees in my 3-acre yard. And I can control that. Now I'm going out into my nature preserves and I'm dealing with what's there. And some of them have been degraded. A lot of times we're hesitant to bring in new stuff until we know what's there. So diversity is some of the natural remnants because we've tried to keep them natural for the most part. We haven't enhanced a lot of them. They don't have, at least around here, we don't have a lot of enhancements. I know Nachusa grassland is enhancing the heck out of things. I know up in Dixon Waterfowl Refuge up there north of Peoria, Illinois, they're adding a lot of things. They are basically recreating, high diversity. That's going to be different than what I have. Some of my sites are old pastures surrounded by woods, and that old pasture has wild parsnip in it. And that's what's attracting the insects. So I'm just trying to basically get a snapshot of my preserves. I'm not looking at super high quality sites necessarily. Sometimes it's the best of what we have, but I'm not doing reconstructions unless they're in our nature preserve system. I want things that are permanently protected so that I'm not wasting. I don't want to do all these surveys that I hope will go on for, time and time. I'm going to go 5, probably 10 years. I don't want to sample something that could be plowed up and destroyed in 5 years when the landowner changes or something like that. So I want these to be permanent. If the site improves, great. But there's not a lot of extremely conservative plants in big numbers. So not a lot of diversity. The flourishing quality indices of these things are not near as high as some of the best sites. Nope, there's not a lot of attention in West Central Illinois.
Great, thank you. Another question about the surveys that you're doing. Do you include larvae or caterpillars in those surveys or just adults?
I just do adults. Yeah. Because the larvae are not feeding on pollen and nectar.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question is, do you ever incorporate photography of hill-topping insect species that might catch additional species in some of your sites?
Yes. Like I said, I record all bees and butterflies. So regardless of whether or not they're on a flower, if I see a hill-topping skipper, I'm going to chase that thing down. I want to know what it is. Because we've lost our toey skippers. There's a lot. We've lost our cobweb skippers. There's just a lot of species that are no longer found in Illinois anymore. So I'm always looking for them. I'm looking for hilltopping. I do several hill prairies, and I'm up there. And if they're flying around and they're a pollinator, I'm going to count them, whether or not they're on a flight. Now, they're harder to photograph. But like I said, I've been doing the butterflies for 25 years. So I may not have a photograph of, but if I can identify it, it's going down.
Thank you. Another question that we received, this is another photography question, is what are the best times of day to photograph? You did mention weather and sort of sun intensity, but is there a general time of day that you like to go out?
I try to do most of my surveys based on, of course, my work day, but I try to do 10 to 3. So that's my block. It's interesting. Sometimes I go out, a lot of times they say there's certain bees that'll only go out first thing in the morning when the flowers are actually producing their nectar. And I'm missing those. I'm missing the 8 a.m. bees. That's just, I don't get to my sites. They're too far away. I never get there in time. And then there's some bees. Sometimes I go to sites at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I find a huge amount of pollinators on things. That's probably more rare, but yeah, just based on my work day, yeah, the 10 to 3 is kind of what I'm trying to hit. And I'm not finding everything. That's the one thing I'm finding now that I'm doing voice recording. I thought there'd be a lot more overlap in the number than the species that I'm counting. So I thought, maybe, at least 50% overlap. I'm barely getting 50%. So there's a lot of things I saw 5 years ago that I didn't see this time around. And there's new things that I'm finding this time around that I didn't see initially. And I'm surprised by that, which leads me to believe that I'm missing them. So I missed them the first time. I'm missing some of them now. I'm only getting a snapshot of an hour, 4 times during the season. So there's a lot more out there that I'm just not getting. But by nature of the huge data set I have, I'm not going to increase that. So
thank you. And then one, I think, final question that we have is, have you noticed, as you've been doing these surveys, a significant decline or increase in a particular insect species population that you can think of off the top of your head without looking at your data in front of you?
Well, I noticed like I did mention the red-banded hairstreak. There are some species that are moving north, and that's exciting. But a lot of it's going to have to be data crunches. It's hard to establish a trend based on 2 years, and that's really all I have. I only have 6 sites where I have 2 years of data on them, so I can't really establish a trend. I've got trends for butterflies, and I mapped my trends for my 25 years of butterflies, and it's up and down. It's crazy. It's absolutely insane. You cannot look at the trend graph for a red admiral or a pearl crescent that you sample once a year, because one year they may be in larval stage when you're counting the adults, and another year they could be in peak abundance. And so the graph just goes haywire. The one thing that I can say about butterflies, where I have all this data, is the number of grass skippers is crashing. The number of skippers that we used to see, I have data back to the 70s. They used to see like 30 different species of skipper back in 1978. We are lucky to see 5 today. I mean, we have lost diversity. Now, numbers can go up. I could have, this year is a big year for Zabulon skippers. I could have 30 Zabulon skippers on my count in a couple of weeks. And then next year I'll have 1. You cannot see the trend. You can only see the trend based on the diversity of species, and it's going down.
Thank you for that insight. And that is a good reminder to, when we're looking at insect populations and insect abundance, that looking at an individual species gives us one view, but then looking at biodiversity and comparing total numbers across species and relative diversity among those is another really important question to be asking and to be surveying the data for. So thank you so much, Angela. I think that, or Angela, I'm so sorry. I mispronounced your name. I'm so sorry. I think that we have gotten to the end of our questions. We did have a few comments that were just simply, wow, what a wonderful presentation. And I want to echo that. As mentioned before, this webinar has been recorded, and an email will be sent to you tomorrow with the link to the recording and other helpful resources that Angela has presented for us today. We will not be hosting a webinar on Wednesday, June 19th due to the Juneteenth holiday, but we will be back on July 3rd with a presentation by Ken McCarty on native bees. So that should be of interest to a lot of folks who are listening in this afternoon. Well, thank you again, Angela, so much for your presentation. And we really appreciate you spending the afternoon with us. Thank you all and have a great evening.
Thanks.